Most adults over 60 are told two things about what to drink. Stay hydrated and cut back on alcohol. That's the entire conversation. And while both of those are true, neither of them tells you what your cardiovascular system is actually asking for at this stage of life. I want you to picture something. You're 64 years old, blood pressure running a little high. Your doctor mentioned it at your last 2 appointments. You're already on one medication and not thrilled about adding a second. A friend mentions she's been drinking something specific every morning for 3 months, and her doctor just told her at her most recent check that her numbers had improved enough to revisit her medication plan. She's not doing anything exotic. She just changed what she was drinking consistently every day based on what she'd read about the research. That's not a miracle. That's biochemistry. And the reason most people don't know about it is that what you drink rarely comes up in a standard appointment the way what you eat sometimes does. My name is Dr. William Parker. For 21 years, I've worked with adults over 60, and today I want to walk you through 5 specific drinks backed by genuine clinical evidence for supporting cardiovascular health, ranked from helpful to the one with the single most robust blood pressure data I've seen in any dietary intervention study. Stay with me through all 5 because the 4th one comes with a medication warning. I want to make sure you hear clearly before you try it. And the 5th one, ranked number 1, has a specific amount and a specific timing that the research actually validates, not just a general recommendation to drink more of it. Before we go further, if this kind of precise science-based information is what you're looking for, go ahead and subscribe. This channel exists to give adults over 60 accurate, usable guidance without the extremes, and it helps more people find that when you do. Now let's get into it. Before we get into specific drinks, you need one concept, because without it, you won't fully understand why these 5 drinks actually work. I call it the nitric oxide gap. Here's what changes about your cardiovascular system specifically after 60. 3 things. First, your blood vessels produce less nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a molecule your blood vessel walls make naturally, and its job is to signal the smooth muscle surrounding your arteries to relax and widen. More nitric oxide means wider, more flexible vessels, better blood flow, and lower blood pressure. Less nitric oxide means the opposite: stiffer, narrower vessels, higher pressure, more resistance for your heart to pump against. Second, this decline in nitric oxide production isn't just about age itself. It's driven by reduced activity of an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the enzyme that produces nitric oxide in the vessel wall, and this enzyme becomes less active with age, with high blood pressure, with chronic low-grade inflammation, and with reduced dietary intake of specific compounds that support it. It's worth spending a moment on why nitric oxide specifically connects to so many other concerns beyond just blood pressure. Nitric oxide doesn't only regulate vessel tone, it also inhibits the formation of plaque buildup on vessel walls by reducing how readily platelets and inflammatory cells stick to vessel surfaces. It improves blood flow to the kidneys, which affects how effectively they regulate fluid balance and blood pressure from their end. And it affects circulation to the brain, which is part of why reduced nitric oxide production has been linked in some research to cognitive changes with age, since the brain is extraordinarily sensitive to small changes in blood flow. Addressing the nitric oxide gap isn't just about a number on a blood pressure cuff, it's about how well blood actually moves through every system in your body that depends on it. Third, and this is the one most people never hear about, the 2 main ways to restore nitric oxide are direct precursors in food, meaning compounds your body converts directly into nitric oxide through the dietary nitrate pathway, and compounds that activate or protect the enzyme that makes it. Different drinks on today's list work through each of these 2 different pathways, which is why the combination of more than one of them tends to produce better results than any single drink alone. Here's the cascade this creates. Nitric oxide production falls, blood vessels stiffen and narrow, blood pressure climbs, your heart works harder against more resistance, circulation to the extremities, the kidneys, and the brain becomes less efficient. And most of this happens so gradually that the only way anyone notices is when a blood pressure reading at an appointment prompts a medication conversation. Keep the nitric oxide gap in mind as we go through each drink today, because every single one on this list connects back to addressing it from a different angle. Now, take a moment and think back to how you felt physically 10 years ago. Do you remember your legs feeling genuinely light after a morning walk rather than just serviceable? Do you remember not noticing your feet being cold at the end of the day? Do you remember not thinking twice about whether you could make it up a long flight of stairs without catching your breath? A lot of people over 60 attribute changes like these purely to age. Some of it is, but some of it is circulation. And circulation responds to inputs in a way that pure aging doesn't. If any of that sounds familiar, this video was made specifically for you. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. None of these 5 drinks is a substitute for medication your doctor has prescribed, and none of this is medical advice. What these drinks do is support the same physiological processes that blood pressure medications target through different complementary mechanisms in ways that have been tested in human clinical trials, not just animal studies or theoretical models. The research is clear, the mechanisms are understood, and adding 1 or 2 of these drinks consistently is, for most people, a genuinely low-risk, evidence-backed choice alongside whatever else they're doing for their cardiovascular health. Before we go deeper, if you'd like a structured way to track habits like these alongside your other health practices, I've put together a free longevity guide linked in the description below. Thousands of people in this community already use it. Go grab it now, and we'll keep working through today's topic together. So how does this actually work in the body? Picture your arteries as garden hoses and blood flow as the water running through them. When the hose is flexible and wide, water flows easily at low pressure. When the hose is stiff and narrowed, the same pump has to work much harder to push the same amount of water through, which is exactly what elevated blood pressure represents. A heart working harder to push the same blood through vessels that have become less cooperative. Nitric oxide is essentially the signal that tells the hose to relax and expand. When it's abundant, your vessels are more flexible, pressure drops, and flow improves. When it's depleted, the hose stays partly constricted and pressure stays elevated. The drinks we're about to discuss work either by providing raw materials your body converts directly into nitric oxide, or by activating the enzyme that produces it, or by reducing the inflammation that suppresses it. Now that you understand the mechanism, let me walk you through the 5 drinks that address it most directly. A 2022 systematic review and meta-analysis published in the journal Phytomedicine pooled data from 11 randomized controlled trials specifically in hypertensive patients and found that beetroot juice produced a mean reduction in systolic blood pressure of approximately 5 to 5.5 millimeters of mercury compared to placebo. A separate meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition pooled data from 22 randomized controlled trials and found consistent systolic blood pressure reductions with beetroot juice supplementation, with the effect being larger with longer duration of use, 14 days or more compared to shorter durations. That's not a trend or a single promising study. That's pooled data from hundreds of participants across multiple independent trials, and it changes how we need to think about something as simple as what's in your morning glass. I've ranked 5 drinks from helpful to most impactful for blood pressure specifically, so you know exactly where to focus if you're only going to add 1 or 2 things. And the 5th one, ranked number 1, has the most specific, most validated evidence for blood pressure reduction of anything I'll share today. Stay with me because it only fully lands once you understand the ranking that leads to it. Before we get into individual drinks, it's worth addressing how these 5 work together, since the research on their combined use is more practically useful than considering each one in isolation. The first 2 drinks on this list, coconut water and tart cherry juice, address potassium balance and inflammation respectively. The middle drink, green tea, works primarily through the enzyme pathway to increase your blood vessel's own nitric oxide production. The last 2, hibiscus tea and beetroot juice, work partly through ACE inhibition and partly through direct dietary nitrate supply. Because these mechanisms are genuinely different, using 2 or 3 of them consistently tends to produce additive rather than redundant effects. A practical daily pattern that incorporates several of them without feeling overwhelming might look like this. Beetroot juice in the morning, green tea in the mid-morning, hibiscus tea in the afternoon, and tart cherry juice in the evening. Coconut water can fit naturally around any physical activity or simply as an afternoon drink. That's not a rigid prescription, and doing one or two of them consistently is far more valuable than attempting all five sporadically. The goal is sustainable consistency, not a perfect daily protocol that falls apart after 2 weeks. The first drink is coconut water. Robert was 66, managing mildly elevated blood pressure, and had been told by a colleague that coconut water was good for his heart without much further explanation. Most people think coconut water is essentially a pleasant-tasting natural sports drink with no particularly meaningful cardiovascular benefit. That's an underestimate. Coconut water is genuinely one of the better food-based sources of potassium available, with a typical serving of around 8 ounces containing roughly 500 to 600 milligrams of potassium, depending on the brand and whether it's from concentrate. Potassium matters for blood pressure through a specific physiological mechanism. It helps your kidneys excrete sodium more efficiently through the urine, and it directly relaxes blood vessel walls by counteracting the tension that sodium promotes. Research consistently supports potassium intake as one of the most reliable dietary contributors to lower blood pressure, and most Americans over 60 consume significantly less potassium than their bodies ideally need, particularly if they're also eating a higher sodium diet. One 8-ounce serving of unsweetened coconut water daily is a practical way to meaningfully increase potassium intake without dramatically changing your diet. The mistake most people make with coconut water is choosing flavored or sweetened versions which add sugar that counteracts some of the cardiovascular benefit, or drinking it alongside a high-sodium meal where the potassium benefit is being partially offset immediately. If you're on a potassium-sparing diuretic or have kidney disease that requires you to limit potassium, please talk to your doctor before adding coconut water regularly, since this is one case where more potassium isn't automatically appropriate for everyone. Now, tart cherry water works through a completely different mechanism, and this one surprises people who only associate cherries with a nice flavor. Margaret was 71, managing both blood pressure and persistent sleep difficulty, and had tried multiple approaches to each without finding one that consistently helped both. Most people think tart cherry, if they know about it at all, is primarily useful for joint pain or muscle recovery. That's not the full picture. Tart cherries are unusually rich in a specific class of compounds called anthocyanins, which are the dark red pigments that give them their color, and in melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep-wake cycles. Multiple studies have examined tart cherry juice's effect on both sleep quality and blood pressure simultaneously, and found meaningful improvements in both. Research published in the American Journal of Therapeutics and in the European Journal of Nutrition has shown that tart cherry juice consumption improved sleep duration and quality in adults, and separately, research has connected tart cherry's anti-inflammatory properties to modest reductions in systolic blood pressure, particularly in adults who start with elevated inflammation markers. About 8 ounces of unsweetened tart cherry juice, ideally in the evening given its melatonin content, is the serving used in most of the research. The mistake most people make is buying sweetened tart cherry cocktail juice, which is mostly apple or grape juice with some tart cherry added rather than pure, unsweetened tart cherry juice where the active compounds are actually present at meaningful concentrations. One practical detail worth knowing about tart cherry: the melatonin content that makes it useful for sleep, typically in the range of 13 micrograms per 100 milliliters of juice, is a natural food-derived form of melatonin rather than the pharmacological dose found in supplements. This means the sleep-improving effect is generally gentler and less likely to cause the next morning grogginess that higher-dose melatonin supplements sometimes produce. For people who've tried melatonin supplements and found them too strong or leaving them groggy, tart cherry juice consumed 30 to 60 minutes before bed offers a more moderate food-based alternative with the additional benefit of anti-inflammatory anthocyanins that sleep supplements don't provide. Quick pause here. Has your doctor ever specifically talked to you about how what you drink, not just what you eat or what medications you take, might be affecting your blood pressure over time? Drop a comment and let me know. You'd be surprised how many people in this community have managed their blood pressure for years without that conversation ever coming up. The third drink is green tea, and it works primarily through the nitric oxide enzyme pathway rather than the direct nitrate pathway we'll discuss later, which makes it a genuinely complementary pairing with the drinks that follow. Helen was 64, drank 2 cups of black tea every morning, and assumed green tea was essentially the same thing in a slightly different form. Most people think all teas are roughly equivalent in their cardiovascular effects. That's not accurate. Green tea specifically contains an unusually high concentration of a compound called epigallocatechin gallate, commonly abbreviated as EGCG, which is a type of catechin polyphenol that black tea loses through the fermentation process. EGCG has been shown in multiple clinical studies to activate endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the exact enzyme that becomes less active with age, increasing the vessel wall's own production of nitric oxide from the inside rather than supplying it from the diet. A meta-analysis published in PLOS One examining 14 randomized controlled trials found that green tea consumption significantly reduced both systolic and diastolic blood pressure, with the systolic reduction averaging roughly 2 to 3 millimeters of mercury across the pooled data. 2 to 3 cups of brewed green tea daily is the amount used in most of the research showing cardiovascular benefit. The mistake most people make is using tea bags steeped for only 30 seconds or a minute, which extracts far less EGCG than the 2 to 3 minute steeping time used in most clinical research, or choosing bottled sweetened green tea products where the EGCG content has been partially degraded and sugar has been added. Alright, everything up to this point has mattered, but what I'm about to share now is where the real conversation begins. These next 2 drinks are the ones backed by the most specific, most clinically precise evidence on this entire list. The 4th drink is hibiscus tea, and this one deserves particular attention, both for its effectiveness and for the medication interaction I want to make sure you understand before you try it. James was 68, had read about hibiscus tea online and was enthusiastic about trying it, but was also taking a specific blood pressure medication and hadn't mentioned it to his doctor. Most people think herbal teas are essentially harmless additions to any routine, too gentle to interact with anything significant. That's not always accurate, and hibiscus is one of the clearest examples of an herbal preparation with both meaningful clinical benefit and meaningful medication interaction potential. On the benefit side, the evidence for hibiscus tea and blood pressure is among the most specific and rigorously studied of any beverage on this list. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in the Journal of Nutrition, conducted by researchers at Tufts University, followed 65 pre-hypertensive and mildly hypertensive adults who consumed 3 8-ounce cups of hibiscus tea or a matched placebo beverage daily for 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, the hibiscus tea group showed a mean systolic blood pressure reduction of 7.2 millimeters of mercury compared to a 1.3 millimeter reduction in the placebo group, a statistically significant difference. The mechanism is specific and worth understanding. Hibiscus contains compounds that inhibit angiotensin-converting enzyme, often called ACE, which is the same enzyme pathway that a class of blood pressure medications, ACE inhibitors like lisinopril and enalapril, target directly. This is precisely why hibiscus tea is both genuinely effective and potentially problematic in combination with ACE inhibitor medications, since the combined effect may lower blood pressure more than either alone was intended to, potentially too much. If you're taking an ACE inhibitor or any blood pressure medication, please bring hibiscus tea up specifically at your next appointment before adding it consistently. This is important, not a theoretical concern. For people not on blood pressure medication, or those on medication classes other than ACE inhibitors whose doctors confirm it's safe, 3 cups of brewed hibiscus tea daily, specifically using dried hibiscus flowers steeped for 5 to 10 minutes, is the preparation closest to what the research used. The mistake most people make is buying hibiscus-flavored herbal blends, where hibiscus is one of several ingredients rather than the primary one, and where the concentration of active compounds is far lower than what the clinical trials used. Within 1 to 2 weeks of consistent daily hibiscus tea consumption at the 3-cup amount, people with mildly elevated blood pressure often notice their readings running a few points lower, particularly in the mornings. Within 4 to 6 weeks, the effect documented in clinical trials becomes the most measurable. This is one of the faster acting dietary interventions for blood pressure that I've seen in real clinical research. Here it is, the drink that changes the conversation entirely. Beetroot water, or more precisely, beetroot juice. This carries the largest body of clinical evidence for blood pressure reduction of any drink on today's list, and the specific mechanism is the most directly connected to